Hi, everybody. This is Rick Wilson, and welcome to Dragonproof. Looking back at the beginning of this year, we had a goal of creating 10 podcast episodes about e-commerce. The subject was really how to coexist with the dragons in our industry. You know, what we thought of as a dragon was mainly Amazon, other monopoly retailers as well, but really Amazon. That was the premise of the show. And now it's December, 30 episodes later. And, it's cliche to talk about what a year 2020 has been, but it certainly has been. And what we really learned is there's way more dragons than just Amazon and unpredictable dragons. Some industries have been decimated, the service industry specifically, and other industries have thrived. Clothing and accessories, homes, cars, and a lot of that was driven on the backbone of e-commerce. Much of e-commerce is now thriving. The spending will spur more production, more investment in business, and ultimately more jobs. And fingers crossed, we'll keep this whole thing going until vaccine distribution hits critical mass. E-commerce has been battle tested. It's come of age, accelerated this year, but in a sense, crystallizing 2 decades of work. We're going to have many good things to talk about as e-commerce continues to come into its own next year. But the story of this year will be studied for generations from every angle. So in this 2-part episode, we're going to look at our year in review, the people we spoke with, the issues we grappled with, and the things we've seen and learned. And to help me do this, welcome Chris, our producer, who you've heard from before.
So 30 episodes. We went through all of them together, looking at them for this show. Aside from just being gobsmacked about how many conversations we've had, a lot of themes really started to emerge, and we identified 4 major ones that loosely kind of correspond to the different quarters of this year, and they provide a kind of good basis for discussion of the year. So let's just jump right in. The first topic and the theme of so many of our shows was your uncertainty. Definitely one of your favorite topics, right, Rick?
Absolutely. In fact, uncertainty was really the initial premise of the book for Dragonproof. I mean, really, when you and I, going back a few years, were discussing things we could talk about and write about in a book, one of the premises that really struck me was all business, all entrepreneurialism fundamentally starts with being willing to live and thrive or attempt to thrive in a world of uncertainty. And it's a fundamental part of business. Unknowing is a part of business. And one of the challenges, one of the needles you have to thread as an entrepreneur is it's easy to mistakenly assume that you know what you're doing or know more than you do. But it's also crippling to assume you don't know anything. And it's how do you live between those two poles? How do you find your confidence while staying humble? And too much confidence without humility is dangerous as a business person, this year especially. But uncertainty is a fundamental core part of business, and I think the root of the Dragonproof philosophy.
And looking back, here's what the setting was in January, February, March of this year. We had done the impeachment hearings, if you can believe that was this year.
That was this year.
Yeah. The first cases of COVID were starting to come to the U.S. I remember looking at a tracker online, and there were 8 cases in the U.S. I remember watching that number to see when it was.
I remember when they flew people in. I can't remember if they flew in from that cruise ship or from China, but the Air Force had flown in a group of people who had COVID to San Diego, and it was a small group of people, and people in San Diego were up in arms.
It was a scandal.
There was a scandal. They're introducing it to our precious area of San Diego.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we had these really terrifying situations unfolding first overseas in Italy. And by March 19th, California, the state we both live in, issued its first statewide stay-at-home order. And at that same week, we met in a studio in San Diego and recorded our first podcast of the year. And I think it'd be cool if we played a clip of that and some other shows and then see where we're at today versus what we were thinking then. So the very first one was with our good friend Richie Ote. And what was that episode about?
Talk about a time capsule. It was so wild because you brought up to me when we were ready to do that episode, hey, are you willing to, no pun intended, talk about the dragon in the room of this COVID thing? And none of us knew anything. And I was hesitant because I'm like, I'm not an expert. I'm not a virologist or an epidemiologist. What on earth am I going to say? But I think it was a great idea and prescient on your part. And so we went to the studio and we spoke with Richie, about the shock and the fear that we all originally had around this whole thing and how it might impact the business world. So with that, let's listen to a clip from that show.
That's big news that all schools
in Italy are shut down
until
further notice.
Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
1 minute before we press record. This is a living, organic, moving thing. And when we get new information, it's going to change, right? That, like you said, this is the nature of being an entrepreneur. You're constantly getting in. You take educated guesses, and then you take action, and then you adjust according to the data that comes in. So,
yeah, let me sort of walk you through my own personal journey the last week with this.
Yeah, so that's perfect.
Last Friday, I go to lunch with our former CEO and my business partner, which we do every week, and we were eating in a restaurant that happened to be in a large parking lot with a Costco, right? And I walked in saying, "Hey, I think there's a pretty solid chance that we may have to consider postponing MivaCon." And he looks at me and he goes, "I'm following this way more closely. I'm telling you there's a 100% chance we're postponing MivaCon." And moments before this happened, I would have personally guessed the chances at like 1%, right? So it was a life-shifting event. And then the same day, I'm talking to our podcast producer, and he's like, "I've got an idea. What if we do a podcast on the coronavirus?" And I was like, "What the hell am I going to say about the coronavirus? Like, I'm not an expert on this. This isn't my specialty." But that was the uncertainty, which is why it's Dragonproof, right? Because that's exactly what we do all day long, is follow the uncertainty. And then as I'm watching or thinking about this while eating in the Costco parking lot, not actually in the parking lot, but in a restaurant, looking into the parking lot, I started imagining a world in 4 weeks where that parking lot was empty because we were all basically staying home. And then that's how I started doing my own disaster planning in my head about our business. Like, well, let's say that happens, then what do we do? And I work through it. So yeah, this is the reason we're talking about this is the definition of navigating uncertainty, or a dragon we didn't know existed.
So that clip is really amazing to me for a number of reasons. First of all, it was the last time we recorded in an actual studio, right?
That was the last time I saw you live, right? Like in person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Richie's talking about at the beginning of that clip, he's so shocked because we had just gotten word that schools were closing in Italy. That was the news lead of that day. And I don't even understand it now because it doesn't sound like anything relative to everything we've
it really
experienced.
doesn't.
The schools were closing in Italy. So looking back from December, at what kind of basic challenges we were up against as e-commerce businesses then? And how does uncertainty factor into that?
The biggest issue for me then was being willing to undergo a very real-time and very massive paradigm shift, which that clip actually perfectly illustrates, right? I recall everything I said in that clip vividly. This is probably one of those things that I'll recall vividly for the rest of my life. And now, like you said, looking back on it, I don't want to be glib and say it seems quaint, but my paradigm has so thoroughly shifted from then until now that it seems like, well, of course that's what happened. And I think that's always a challenge for business people in general. If I take that away from the coronavirus and make it a bigger topic, it's that willingness to take new data and rethink a paradigm from the ground up in real time, and can do it over and over and over again. Like finally crafting a thought is how at least I managed my way through uncertainty. And I remember, it's been going on all year. I feel like that muscle in my mind has gotten stronger, but that was the first 2 months of this were very much every single week. And I remember us talking every week, and every week it seemed like, oops, we just learned this new thing. Now we're going to adjust to this. And we just learned this new thing and we have to adjust to this. And I recall talking to a lot of people back then who did not want to believe those things. They thought things were going to be over in a couple months. There was just this sense that they could grin and bear it, or kind of buckle down and bear it. And I think that would have been the most dangerous thing for an entrepreneur to do, because, nature, if you will win. And adaptability is how you survive or even thrive during those times.
Well, how do you know in that moment that you're on a paradigm shift and not something that you just have to get through for 3 weeks? At what point does it become a paradigm shift?
That's a good question. I think you start by looking for assumptions, right? So if your assumption is it's going to be over in a few weeks, and you might be correct, the first thing you have to do is, well, why do I think that? Like, what is my evidence of that being true? And then you have to be willing to compare that to the evidence that you really see. I mean, this is both sort of funny and tragic. It's like the people who think the election was rigged. They're clearly not looking at the evidence of what's going on. The election was not rigged if you're listening. And if you disagree with me, you don't have to listen to me ever again. I don't care. So the election was not rigged. And if you can't see that, then you are unwilling to take a look at evidence and see the reality of the situation. And I think that was true then. If Fauci, for example, had been saying at the time this will be over in 3 weeks, then that would have been decent evidence to consider. But what was being said by the experts and by virologists, epidemiologists, infectious disease experts was this could go on for a year or two. And so the assumption that you might be able to bear it for 3 or 4 weeks, I think looking back on it, was purely ego or hope. It wasn't based on evidence.
So basically, there's a psychological hurdle that one has to get over, especially in a really shocking moment like that. But once you get over that and you accept, all right, the game is changing way beyond like what I had planned for, what are the more practical areas that a business needs to start addressing right away, like when we enter into one of those moments?
So, I mean, I don't know that there's a one-size-fits-all rule around that. I can talk about my process, but I've just noticed that everyone processes information a little differently. So I think this is going to vary depending on kind of how your brain works. For me, it starts with, I start playing through chain reactions in my head. So, okay, if we can't go to the office anymore, then I got to get people working from home. And what do I do to get people working from home? If I was actually shipping product like most of our customers, I would have started thinking through, what do I do to make sure product keeps getting out the door? I would have thought through, what do I do to make sure I still have supply? But I really start playing out all of the chain of events that I can guess as far into the future as I can, right? So I think for me at that time, it took a couple months, but as it was unfolding, I would say by May, and maybe we'll figure this out in the year in review, somewhere around May, it had clicked for me that this was going to go on well into 2021. And so you play out that chain of events as far as you can, but also that can become overwhelming, at least for me. So you get to a point where, it's like a compounding algebra questions. Like you're guessing on guessing on guessing on guessing. And it's good to think those things through so that you're not caught off guard when the time comes for those to be faced. But then I like to pull it back. So in that case, I just pulled it back to, okay, well, the immediate thing is, how do we successfully work from home, right? So I went to our CIO and I went to our director of IT. I went to our COO, and there was a very specific conversation around what physical hardware do we have to buy? What security measures do we have to put in place? How can we move everyone to remote first and work from home and still maintain continuity of the business? And that became the thing that we had to hurdle next. And then in our particular case, the next hurdle was, how do you check in on everyone and make sure they're doing okay? Like, how do you make sure the culture of the company is okay? But culture for culture's sake is not the point of it, at least not to me. It really is about, like, are my employees doing okay, right? Like, I used to have the ability to walk through the office and talk to them, see the look on their face. There's, what do they say? 70% of communication is nonverbal. Well, most of that's been lost. And so one of the hurdles was, how do you solve for that? How do you make sure people are being well taken care of when so much of the data you used to have is missing? And I kept pulling on it that way. And I think that's true for most of our customers, right? If you know you have supply, and if you know you have a way for your employees to keep working, and if you know you have a way to fulfill, so these are obviously specific to e-commerce, get those things in place. But then from there, you go to the next thing, which for an e-commerce store might have been, am I selling the right products right now? If I was selling travel getaways, it probably was time to make some adjustments. But we had customers, for example, who used to sell elastic and cloth, and they transformed that into a mask kit business, right? And so there was really interesting decisions and clever pivots that came out of it that I wouldn't have guessed. But I think it really comes from thinking through that way. And I think most entrepreneurs who would be listening, they can relate to that. Part of what you do as an entrepreneur is you sit around and think, well, how can I do this differently? And you key in on ideas. And so I think that's the process.
Well, that's actually a great segue to our next clip that we want to play, because we soon then started talking to different kinds of merchants to see how they were navigating the practical end of their business and their products. And in April, we had on Kyle Tortora.
Yeah. So back in April, I spoke with Kyle. He's both a good friend of mine as well as a customer of Miva. And he runs lotussculpture.com. And it's a very specific kind of lifestyle passion business. And he was, his big challenge at the time was grappling with an unpredictable supply chain. So let's start by listening to that clip. I assume you consider yourself a member of the global economy, considering how you source your products.
Absolutely.
So, like, how do you see this this whole concept impacting the global economy?
I mean, I think everywhere is shut down. Every night I talked to India and Vietnam last night, and they're both saying everything is shut down. They can't physically move. They can't physically, in India, they can't physically make my statues, and they can't ship them. So everything is shut down. So this is completely turning off the water spigot for the global economy, the way I see it, how I've seen it personally. When people are buying, say, my statues from Lotus Sculpture, it's still fueling the demand. So when this ends, I'm going to have a backlog of orders that my artists will need to make for me. So I think by people ordering now or in the future, it's kind of jumpstarting the recovery eventually.
Okay, so let's talk about this idea of controlling your products and controlling your inventory. I know this has been a big one for you.
So, I mean, I think, I'm some of these things are contradictory in nature as far as my beliefs go. But on the one side, I'm a fan of the vertically integrated Apple/Steve Jobs approach to the universe, which is you want to control as much as you can, right? So you want to control your product, your supply chain, your ability to get things out the door. And I think the reasons for that are self-evident, which is, if Kyle had magically been able to have a warehouse at his house that people, or not a warehouse, a manufacturing facility in his backyard where people could build statues, then he wouldn't have to worry about getting them shipped from India and Thailand and et cetera, and Vietnam. But in his case, the very nature of his products, what makes his products valuable and special is that they're authentic and they come from overseas. So it's inherently a balancing act. And I think, he had a couple of options there, depending on how long he could estimate something like this would go on. I know for a fact in Kyle's case, I've been to his warehouse many times, he has a lot of inventory in stock. So in his case, he could make a prediction about number of statues he sells per month. Sure, his selection might start getting limited, but he could make some reasonable predictions about inventory on hand, how long that inventory can last, and how long this thing might last. So, probably within a month of that episode, it was a reasonable guess that he'd be able to get product, say, within a year at the worst, or a year and a half. And then he could start estimating if he has enough inventory to get through that. If he didn't, then he might want to make other decisions. It might be a supply and demand time to start changing pricing to make sure he's got enough margin to survive this thing. Now, I'm not talking about like price gouging. I'm not talking about $100 rolls of toilet paper, but I'm talking about if you have X amount of inventory and you have Y amount of time and you need Z amount of income, you can do a math equation based on supply and demand to make sure that you and your business survive a turbulent time.
Now, we later that same month, we spoke to our good friend Corey Lawley, and this is one of my favorite episodes that we've done so far. And because I thought Corey spoke very eloquently to a different approach to how to deal with the same problem. And I think that she, while also working with artisans in the same way that Kyle did, took a really different angle on what to do at that time. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say it was mid-April when I spoke to Corey. And I can tell you, Corey, I'm close friends with Kyle, but I'm very, very close friends with Corey. I talk to Corey, at a minimum monthly, if not more often. And I watched her business go in waves this year. There's a point when her business had shut down entirely. There's a point when her business had spiked due to the stimulus from Congress, and then cratered again once that money ran out. And then picked back up when the service industry reopened, and then cratered again. So she's had a roller coaster of a year.
She took the full ride. Yeah.
Oh yeah, she took the full ride. But I think her focus on building community is both what energized her. It saved her business. It energized her, and I think it's really set her up for the future. But let's listen to what she has to say. So, there's a tweet here that you posted. It says, I've taken some personal time to digest all this, and honestly, it feels personally inauthentic to be selling and marketing during this time. I've been investigating the commodity of community and how Maya as an organization can contribute to our collective wellness. Explain.
So I almost became paralyzed when this happened, thinking about trying to promote and sell something to people, when I feel what people really need right now is just to be with themselves and grow their strength and their bonds with each other. To the point where I wasn't even posting on social media, and social media is the backbone of my business. I have a really huge social media following, and I've been very fortunate to be able to grow that and capitalize on it quite well. So us being completely silent was definitely a bit of a void, and I felt as though I needed to say something. And I thought about it for a while, and I kept writing and writing and writing. And what kept coming back to me is like the thing that I can offer now to the people that follow my company is the things that help me, and like the backbone of who I am, which is my self-care practices, my meditation practices, my yoga practices, and also just reminding people that this is a time, and reminding myself also, this is a time to slow down and be introspective and really think about what's important, so that when we come back, we can come together stronger than before and use the platform and the community that we have to really have an even more incredible reach than we did before this virus happened.
Wow. So she really hits on a theme that became super important to us all year, which is that taking care of yourself is not opposed to the goals of taking care of a business. In fact, they totally inform one another. What is the state of Corey's of Maya Jewelry right now? Do you know?
I don't know in real time, but I know that, like I said a few minutes ago, or a couple minutes ago, that she's been up and down all year. She launched a new product line, I want to say about 60 days ago, and I know it's sold out almost immediately. So, I think, yeah, it's been great. Her business just looks different now, and I think she's still trying to define the waterline, if you will. But she personally is thriving, which means that fundamentally her business will thrive, and I think that's one of the things we're keying on here.
I mean, what do you think, in a larger sense, are the factors which dictated a business that would be on that kind of wavy ride versus one that had a different reaction?
So in her case, she had some interesting confluence of events. So on the one hand, she had just straight economics. Her average customer is someone who tends to work in the service industry in a big city, right? So you're talking about people, and many of them make a lot of money, and a lot of it's cash, right? Because they're working, they were bartenders, they were waitresses, they were in the entertainment industry. You're talking about service industry, well-paid service industry people were kind of her bread and butter. And so she rode up and down with their economic realities, and that was something she was not in control of. But I think her focus on her own well-being, her own self-care, as well as the community, and she took her downtime during all this to design. And I think sitting down and designing and not worrying about doing it the old way or doing it the way her competitors were doing it, and just doing it her way. That's probably the most common conversation her and I have had pre-COVID, post-COVID, during COVID, is she doesn't need, and I would say this is true for almost everyone, she doesn't need to do it their way. She needs to do it her way. And I think she was able to when there was downtimes, lean into what she needed to do for the next time there was an uptime. And almost like surfing, she was able to really find her line in that wave and run with it.
Do you think, based on this experience, she and businesses like hers are going to have, I guess, what we call like a more certain environment next year to restart and build and grow even bigger, or no? That would
be my guess. I think the only way that doesn't happen in her particular case would be if there's a mutation of the virus that renders these vaccines ineffective. Right. So I think we're all in this cautious jubilation right now that the vaccine, assuming you believe in vaccines, and you should believe in vaccines, just like you should believe in the election, and just like COVID's real. So we're on the same page here. But the thing is, as long as we get back to some semblance of normalcy next year, her business should stabilize and grow. And I believe she will be rewarded for the ride she took this year from a creative standpoint, from a community standpoint, and just taking care of people in her life standpoint.
But as you say, she's going to have to be flexible enough to adapt to what the world serves her and serves us coming, which really brings us to our next theme, moving on from uncertainty and moving on from this quarter into the next part of the year. And that theme is adaptability. What do you mean by adaptability in business?
Well, this is a bit of what we touched on a little bit ago about the paradigm shift. You have to, it is a weird art. You have to wake up every day, have the security and confidence to move forward with bold choices while simultaneously accepting that the things you assumed to be true the day before may not be true any longer, and being willing to look at those things and then therefore adapt your business, your management style, your business, all aspects of it to this new reality that you've figured out.
So here's the scene as we move into the next quarter of the year, May, June, and July. So lockdowns have been implemented throughout the country. The crisis in New York was on everybody's minds. We had reached the terrible milestone of the first 100,000 people who had died from COVID by May 28. And by the end of that month, the BLM George Floyd protests began and became one of the other major stories of our year. So against this backdrop, we spoke to Jen Hardman from Miva. What was this episode all about?
So one of the things we were trying to figure out all year was, if you go back to my opening of this podcast, we originally thought we were going to do 10 podcasts where we interviewed merchants about, competing against dragons. And a few things happened. One is, and speaking of adaptability, it didn't take long to realize that most merchants said the same thing. And that was starting to become, not that the info is boring, but having a podcast where it's just a different person saying the same thing every week isn't what we wanted. And we started examining who else can we interview? What else can we bring into this conversation to get new perspectives that would help our listeners, live by these principles that we're talking about. So we invited Jen in, who's our VP of HR at Miva, about how we as a company transitioned from a very large office here in San Diego, where for all intents and purposes, everyone was in full-time every day, and switching to a work from home company and ultimately a remote first company in real time. And adaptability was obviously critical for that to succeed. So in this clip, and about how we adapted to those challenges of supporting our workers who are homeschooling at the same time. So what are the unique challenges for people with children at home during this lockdown?
Well, I think a lot of people are facing having to homeschool their children in addition to working their full-time job. And it's close to impossible, the position that many of us are in.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't possibly be 110% productive at your job and 110% productive at schooling and parenting your children. So that's hard. I think the other thing along those lines that's hard is we don't really know how long this is going to go on for, right?
No, we
don't. So if there was an end in sight and we knew, hey, we're maybe in this position for another month, that would be one thing. But I think we're all anticipating this could be a lot longer than that. So it is challenging. I mean, I think everyone's making it work to the best of their ability. And the other thing that Miva is doing to support employees that have children or, have distractions at home is we're just being even more flexible and accommodating than we have in the past. And that's one of the things that we did previously. We were always really flexible around people's schedules and whatnot, but even more so now, our expectation is that people perform their jobs, but we're open to the hours that they perform at and really understanding that they're balancing a lot right now.
I mean, there's really no better example of adaptability than the transition to work from home for everyone in this country. And one of the interesting aspects of that is this idea of childcare being like an add-on challenge that we didn't maybe even necessarily understand at the very beginning. That was going to be such a major component of that challenge, and we had to adapt to that. But now, in December, with the most amazing news that these vaccines are on the way, meaning that it will eventually and hopefully soon become a lot easier for us to work together, be in physical spaces together. The conditions are changing. Does that mean that Miva and businesses like Miva are going to adapt back to a physical workplace? Is that what you see coming, or no?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, I want to talk about a few different things here. So the short answer to that question, which I'll return to here in a second, is I don't see us going back to, well, in fact, not only do I not see us going back, we are not going back to full-time in-office work. We've already told our employees that. We've had a number of employees, roughly 8% of our workforce, move into other states around the country. So, and we have some rules inside about getting that approved and blah, blah, blah. But no, we're not going back to the way it was. We do foresee having co-work spaces or physical spaces. Imagine a WeWork, but just for us. And we would expect to launch the first one of those maybe this time next year, more likely Q1 of 2022. It's one thing that vaccine will be available and that it'll be safe to start gathering, hopefully. But we still don't know what work spaces are going to look like. We don't know. I suspect the open office floor plan is a thing of the past, at least for a long while. So we want to be I wouldn't say cautious, but we want to know what we're doing before we do it. But with that said, I think there's so much about adaptability here. So yeah, the vaccines are coming. And it was funny. I was just talking about this in a senior management meeting yesterday. As you know, 8 months ago, has it been 8 months, 7 months, whatever it's been. I was sounding the alarm routinely that don't assume this is going to last 3 or 4 weeks. This is going to last for a year or longer. And I was trying not to be Debbie Downer. I was trying to give people caution. And now I believe, and again, cautiously, that next year will look different and in a great way. That I believe we are on the precipice of getting this thing under control and starting to get into the next chapter. I don't want to say go back to normal because we're not going back to where we were, but get into the next chapter of what it's going to look like in a post-COVID world. And so, that's what adaptability is all about, is being able to see those things. And one of the things I've seen people struggle with all year, especially in like my social media and in more of my personal life, you'll see people who are very frustrated with the fact that the quote unquote experts, the government, scientists, whatnot, didn't know everything at the beginning. And I think that is also part of adaptability. It was impossible to know everything at the beginning, and people struggle with that. You'll see people complain, well, I'm just tired of the government changing the rules or the CDC changing the rules. Well, there are times, obviously, the government does incredibly stupid things. I mean, I'm not a believer in the all-powerful, all-knowing government. In fact, I'm far from that, if you know me. But what I will say is the CDC, Fauci, I believe in general, there has been no evidence that they were not doing their best. At least the US-based institutions they were doing their best, and they were providing the best information. A great example is it appears that young children are not a significant risk of spread while at school. We could not have known that 6 or 8 months ago. That was something it took opening the schools, measuring, monitoring, and learning. And so those are the things where adaptability comes about. If you get hung up on the fact that in April, an expert said one thing, and now in December, they're saying something different, then you're actually not being adaptable. You're missing the whole point of adaptability, which is to take new information, process it, and make a more educated decision than you were capable of making before you had that information.
Now, not just giant companies had to do this, or even moderately large companies, but individual sellers from across the spectrum also had to get into this mode of just adapting on the fly to everything that was coming down the pike every single day. And to speak to that, in May, we had Robbie Stanley come on the show.
Yeah, so back in May, Robbie's been a long time business friend of mine. I wouldn't know Robbie if it wasn't for Miva, but through Miva, I've known Robbie for, 15, 16 years. And it started out, he ran a company called Direct Fix, which was really one of the first companies to pioneer fixing your own iPhone screens. And speaking about someone who's adaptable by its very nature, he saw the writing on the wall. people no longer fix their own iPhone screens for the most part. And so, that's part of Apple Care Plus, and you go to Apple and you drop it off and there's a special machine and blah, blah, blah. And so Robbie transitioned from that to Feedback Wiz, and he's now at a new company. And so he is really keen on seeing the future and being adaptable. And we talked to him about Amazon sellers, like all businesses in 2020, how are they adapting to new conditions and mastering them? So with that, let's listen to that clip. So do you think there's essentially a COVID gold rush happening right now?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, there is on certain items, but on certain products, no way. That people are losing their butts on. What was the one one of the ones they always used was the neck pillows, right? How many people are traveling right now?
Yeah,
everybody's got a closet full of neck pillows right now that they can't even use. And I'm sure there's a warehouse, several warehouses out there that just have a ton of them not being used now 2-3 years from now, but that product's going to be old 2 or 3 years from now.
Yep.
So,
are you seeing sellers signing up now who would never have considered selling on Amazon before? Or are you seeing this kind of the same group?
We're actually seeing a big influx right now of new sellers. Yeah. We're getting a lot of new sellers coming in, signing up. This all happened probably within the last couple of weeks, because obviously, when we were on total lockdown, people were just, kind of just figuring out what was going on. So yeah, we are seeing a ton of new people signing up with us, which means they're signing up with us. They're also selling on Amazon, and which was kind of a shocker, because if we talked a couple months ago, I would have said that, new sellers were kind of dying off in a way. And now there's this resurgence of new sellers. And I think that's going to continue for quite a while.
And do you think, are a lot of these new sellers doing this as a side hustle, or is this their new job?
I would say most of them, it's not the side hustle anymore. They lost their job, or let's say maybe if they didn't lose it, they at least got, maybe pay cut. So it could be, if you're getting pay cut and you're still getting money, it could be considered a side hustle, but it could be also that you're doing it as a side hustle to try to develop it into a full blown job that'll, basically help you out. Or it could also be that, if you're two people, you got two incomes in a household, and one of them maybe is still going and the other one's lacking. It could be that secondary income is looking for, to pick up that extra money and create a company out of it. A lot of times I've noticed some companies that do really successful actually started more as kind of a hobby company, including myself. I started Direct Fix as a hobby. I did not ever intend for it to be a company, a big company that basically had employees and all that type of thing. So yeah, some people may be doing it as a hobby, as selling a few products on Amazon or online to try to make a couple dollars, but it could turn into a full-blown company too.
So I really love this example because he's kind of describing a philosophy, like a way of life, about seizing new opportunities and starting small and then letting them grow organically. And for some people, Amazon did provide that opportunity this year. In addition to delivering our products, it also was a viable way of selling for many people. So let me ask you point blank, how did they do? Like, what did Amazon do that worked, and how did they support sellers or not this year?
Amazon had a mixed year in my mind. Now, their stock didn't have a mixed year. And their sales didn't have a mixed year. So what do I mean by that? Well, I was just reading yesterday, literally someone posted in our community forums that they asked a question they were pondering, and they said, I'm wondering if when I post a question to Amazon seller support, if it's a human answering me or if it's an AI, because the answers are so bad. And I had read an article about this not that long ago about how the problem, as far as I knew, they were humans. Those humans, I believe, at least for North America-based seller support, live in Costa Rica, and they have to answer all questions within 4 minutes to get paid their full wage. And so therefore, they're effectively acting like bad AI because of bad economic policy within Amazon, trying to force throughput that doesn't make any sense. You're not getting the benefit of a human, which is someone stopping and thinking about the thing you're suggesting and getting an answer. So I think from a seller perspective, actually, and this is not that different than a consumer perspective. From a seller perspective, people are excited that Amazon sold a lot of their product this year. They're pissed at Amazon because they're not getting good support. They're frustrated with Amazon because depending on the product they had, they either were allowed to send it to FBA or not allowed to send it to FBA, or they thought they wouldn't be able to send it and then they found out they could, but they missed the holiday season. Amazon, if you talk about adaptability, you had to be ready to adapt to Amazon this year on a real-time basis. And I think for customers were very happy with Amazon in the sense that there was a lot of product available, and it was one of the things that you could reasonably count on to get stuff. But shipping time slipped, fulfillment was messy. The cracks within Amazon's infrastructure really showed this year. So I think I would call it a mixed bag. I think in the long run, Amazon will adapt and and repair a lot of it. But it was a mixed bag for Amazon, and they've certainly burned a lot of bridges that they need to rebuild.
Well, that speaks to what the challenge is for so many brands, in that they want to connect with their audience in a human way. They don't want to be seen as an inhuman megalith algorithm. And they want to speak in a real voice that people can connect with. And so much of our work is about helping people do that. So by the time we get to June, we had a very major challenge on that exact front, which was the really overwhelming and unbelievable global protests for Black Lives Matter and other social justice issues that sprang up in the summer and really rolled through much of the rest of the year. And brands were immediately faced with a challenge of how to handle that, how to deal with that, how to speak. Should you speak? Should you not speak? Is it okay to sell? How do you do it? So along those lines, we brought in John Lawson.
Yeah. So, as if you've been a regular listener to the podcast, John Lawson has been our most frequent recurring guest and our most popular guest. And Chris is correct. On top of pandemic, the BLM and social justice protests that unfolded in June added both a layer of uncertainty and required a level of adaptability that at the time was almost comically intense. And so I invited John Lawson to speak about privilege and protest and how they were impacting our industry. And so for now, let's play that clip and we'll discuss it.
So when Nike posts a pro BLM message, how do you do you feel like it's legit? Do you feel like it's heartfelt? How should companies currently be addressing this? Should they stay quiet? Should they?
Well, Nike put their money where their mouth is, man. Remember with Cap. Yeah. He paid him big money, put him on a billboard, and supported his move that we are talking about today, that he was kneeling about years ago. So, and Nike's not stupid. Here's the thing. You've got to, again, know your audience. You don't have to be leading and charging. You just need to be supporting the movement.
And authentic.
Whatever that is.
Right. So, how, for small business owners, how do we create real change as an individual business owner?
Well, as a small business owner, you just change yourself. All right. Because that if you do right, your business will do right. You'll find the opportunities will find you. You might, bring in some apprentice and start helping them to create a career mind that they can move forward after working with you for a summer. That's something you can easily do. Things like that. The opportunities will find you if your heart is in the right place.
So for a while there, for a few months, every single company on earth was really foregrounding social justice issues in everything that they put out. Not so much now. So I'm wondering if that outpouring of support that we saw then was authentic. And do we think of that as an adaptation to sell more widgets? Or was this adapting to something larger that was going on in the society that'll be lasting?
I think it's both. And I think it depends on a lot of things. I think, John touches on this a lot in that clip. So I think if you're a giant company, right? If McDonald's or KFC puts out a statement about BLM, I don't want to question their authenticity. I don't know those people. But it's easy to assume that was political in nature at the time. But John also states during that clip that for a small business, you just change yourself. And I think that was very true. One of the things that I think is very lasting that came out of this and is that I was raised, I always knew I wanted to own my own business. I always knew I was entrepreneurial. I started creating my first businesses when I was like 8. And so I was raised to believe that you're not supposed to share opinions about politics or social justice or anything like that as a business person, because you risk alienating some percentage of your potential audience. And what one of the big sea changes for me around social justice, BLM, and a number of things from 2020 was I'm over that. Now I'm a fairly moderate person across the board. I don't know what moderate means anymore in America in 2020, but by I think any traditional definition, I'm a pro-business moderate. But I have no problem now just stating the thing I believe in. Now, I also think there's a responsibility that comes with that. I don't state any opinion that comes to mind. I'm not spouting off about stuff I haven't thought through. I think there's a discipline that is required to be authentic. I think if you're willing to stay quiet and avoid the urge to speak for the sake of speaking, that leaves you the space to become authentic. And I think that's a lasting change that we'll see from this. And frankly, the Black Lives Matter movement, the social justice movement, there are so many movements in this country that need allies. And it's time for businesses, small and large, to become allies of those people.
Hear, hear. Well, that gets us to July and the midpoint of our series. So I think we're going to wrap it up there for today. And we're going to come back next week with part 2.
Well, thanks, Chris, for being here today and interviewing me. Let's talk about part 2 of the series. We're going to talk about innovation, good disruption, and how the rest, well, I'm afraid to say how the rest of 2020 played out because there's still a month left, but how the next 5 months of 2020 played out. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. Goodbye.